All right, I will call the Senate Judiciary Committee to order. Will the Secretary please take the roll?
Senator Harris, Senator Orenshaw, Senator Dondero Loop, Senator Wynn, Senator Hansen, Senator Krasner, Senator Stone, Chair Scheibel.
Here, please mark those senators who aren't present yet present when they arrive. We have three bills on our agenda for today. We also do have committees that meet after us at 3:30 that we serve on, chair, and present to. So we're going to move along at a good clip here, but I hope that you all know by now that that doesn't mean that we're not interested in what you have to say or in your bills, but that we want to make sure that actually everybody has a chance to be heard. So if you don't have an opportunity to speak today, we encourage you to submit written comments to us. If you haven't already, you can submit that after the meeting. They become part of the record. I personally read all of them. I encourage the committee all to read all of them as well. And when you're testifying, whether in support or opposition, or even in neutral, I guess, if other people have already said what you were planning to say, you can just say ditto or I agree, and you don't have to use the full 2 minutes. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and open up the bill hearing on SB 335. And I will invite Senator Orenshaw down to the table to get started whenever you're ready. And before you start, I'm going to ask all of our presenters, especially in these next 2 weeks as we are, increasingly busy and things are moving very quickly, let us know at the beginning of your presentation if you have any amendments that we should be looking at so that we're all working from the same literal page.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel, members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. For the record, James Orenshaw, I represent State Senate District 21 down in southern Nevada, and I have been very lucky over the last many months to work with Jonathan Norman to my left from Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada, and more recently with Mendy Elliott, who is also, we've been working together on Senate Bill 335, and I want to briefly explain it, and then with your permission, turn it over to Mr. Norman, Ms. Elliott. There is an amendment which should be up on Nellis. We have been trying to work with all parties, trying to make Senate Bill 335 a balanced piece of legislation, and it's still a work in progress, but I appreciate everyone who's worked together with me. As most of us know, Nevada has been struggling with various housing problems for several years now. Foreclosure, affordability, lack of supply. The subject of Senate Bill 335, our eviction process. Last year, the Joint Interim Standing Committee on the Judiciary devoted quite a bit of time to this subject. However, the interim ended with the various parties unable to reach a final consensus on how to fix what is clearly a serious problem for our state. As I mentioned, I've got Jonathan Norman with me to the left. Mr. Norman has been working diligently on this subject since joining Legal Aid. He has taken part in countless hours of discussions and worked tirelessly to help find a way to fix an eviction system that I believe is not working for our constituents. Our eviction process does not work well for tenants, for landlords, or for our judiciary. With your indulgence, Chair Scheibel, as Mr. Norman is the subject matter expert, I would like for him to provide the committee a brief overview of how Senate Bill 335 will improve our eviction process, how the eviction process currently works, and then speak to the changes in Senate Bill 335 and the amendment that he's been working on with Ms. Elliott. And then if your chair, if you'd be kind enough to let Ms. Elliott speak to the amendment, and then I'm happy to answer any questions.
Chair Scheibel, members of the committee, Jonathan Norman, Jon, Norman. I'm with the Nevada Coalition of Legal Service Providers, which includes Northern Nevada Legal Aid, VARN, Senior Law Program, and the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada. At the beginning, I want to just acknowledge, so there is a similar bill to this in the Assembly, and I just wanted to make sure everyone on the committee was aware of that. I will chalk that up to me being new in the building, and I was worried at a deadline that I wouldn't have a bill, and so there is a bill, AB 340, which is Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong, and it had a hearing last week, and it tracks the same language as the first part of this bill, and then the addition of the, I'll call it the AB 486 defense, and I'll explain that as we go. So with that, you know, in the South, Legal Aid Center and the Civil Law Self-Help Center sees between 300 and 500 people a day for summary evictions. And the number, you know, we have days where we're over 500, and that's just in Clark County. And I would say, so the fundamental thing we're changing in this bill is we're requiring that the landlord file a complaint in a summary eviction action. So currently, and did the committee get these handouts ahead of time? Yes, okay. So they look very similar, right? You could, if you glanced at them, you might think they're the exact same thing, but the significant difference is, in this one, how summary eviction works is the tenant gets a notice, and within that notice period, they must file an answer to the eviction, vacate the premises, or pay the amount of rent they're behind. If they do not file the answer within that period, then a lockout notice can issue. What we're suggesting in the new AB 340, if it becomes law, is that the landlord, after the 7 days, will file a complaint, and the tenant will have a period to respond to that complaint with the court. And that tracks every civil procedure that I'm aware of in the state and in the country. I'm not aware of another proceeding where the answer is the first pleading filed with the court. So simply put, that is what the first part of this bill does, is it requires a complaint to be filed first. And so I'm going to walk through these slides just to kind of highlight this difference. So step one, the landlord serves the eviction on a tenant. I'm going to talk about the 7-day notice to pay or quit because it's the most common. And I just mentioned this, within the notice period, the tenant has options. They can comply with a notice by vacating, they can pay their rent, cure the lease violation. If they do that, there is no eviction, right? Step two, after the notice period, we would like the landlord to file a complaint to request eviction. So then the first document filed with the court is a complaint for eviction, and they serve the tenant. Step three, after the service of complaint, the tenant has 10 days to file the answer, has to be filed with the appropriate justice court. And if they do file the answer, it's going to be set for a hearing where the tenant is going to be able to argue their case and the judge is going to make a decision. If they don't, then the court will review the pleadings, make sure everything lines up, that the party was properly noticed, and they'll issue the default eviction notice. Step four, well, I just covered the first two on there. And then the tenant has the ability to appeal to district court. And then if at the hearing the court determines that the tenant has legal defenses and they don't grant the eviction, so sorry I raced through those. I feel like I touched on them in my opening. So here's the process we would like to follow. And so with that as kind of the background, that the fundamental change is we want the complaint to be the first document filed with the court. I'm just going to run you real quickly through what the bill does by sections. So Section 2 sets out the new procedure for summary eviction. Notice to the tenant, what should be in the notice, lays out how the landlord goes about filing an affidavit of complaint and what must be in the complaint, including that the tenant has 10 days to respond by filing an answer, and that if they don't, they will be evicted. That the court has a hearing if the tenant files an answer. Section 3 spells out service as it relates to weeklies outlined in subsection 3 of Section 2. Section 4 sets out the timelines for the constable to act when they receive the order of removal. Section 5 reorganizes 40.253. Section 6 reorganizes 40.253 as well. Section 7 lays out new process for other types of eviction in the current Chapter 40. Section 8 lays out the same procedure for commercial premises is found in NRS 40.2542. Section 9 to 20 are conforming changes, and Section 21 enacts the law for summary evictions where the breach by the tenant is on. So this is when the bill becomes effective. And then I would add that the additional thing that was not in AB 340 is the 486 defense from last session. If you're not familiar with the 486 defense, it says that if you have a pending rental assistance application with the county or local government, you cannot, the eviction is stayed until the local government has decided if you're eligible for rental assistance. And so that bill sunsets on June 5th of this year. So this would be an extension of that affirmative defense that the tenant can raise. And so those are the two pieces of this bill. One is requiring the complaint to be filed first, and two is the AB 486 defense continued. And Ms. Elliott has a friendly amendment on the Housing Authority.
Yes, thank you so much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Mindy Elliott with Flynn Judiciary Government Affairs, today representing the Nevada Rural Housing Authority, and behind me is Mr. Brewer, who is the Executive Director for the Nevada Rural Housing Authority, and he's my phone a friend if there's any discussion. The amendment that is before you, it says 7. It's actually for Section 9, and Section 9, as Mr. Norman, I do want to thank Jonathan Norman and certainly Senator Orenshaw for allowing this friendly amendment. But Mr. Norman and I have spent many evenings talking through this bill. But in Section 9, you'll see in the 486 that if a tenant has a pending application for rental assistance, then that qualifies them for an affirmative defense. The concern that the housing authorities have with that quote of a rental assistance, for many of you who have been following what is happening with the vouchers, if someone has applied for a voucher, for a Section 8 housing choice voucher, what our amendment does, it excludes that application under the, going over to back to my amendment, there's my amendment. Under Section 7, this section does not apply to any proceeding for eviction relating to C, income-based rental assistance pursuant to 42 U.S. Code 1437F. So if someone, just because someone has applied for a housing voucher, because as many folks know, it sometimes could take a year, it could take 2 years, it wouldn't allow the tenant to stay in their unit or in their residence just because they applied, they have an application pending for a housing voucher. So there was concern that could be used as a defense, and it would give landlords, would provide a tenant a reason to not be evicted. So we wanted to make sure that we cleared that, made it very clear that just because you have a housing voucher application pending, that you cannot use that as a reason to not be evicted. I hope that's, I got a thumbs up from my phone a friend, so I did okay.
And I would just add, in working through this progress, I'd say we've engaged, or every stakeholder has engaged me on summary evictions, and we've had a lot of really good discussions. And I think in both this bill and in AB 340, we're going to have a pretty significant amendment that gets us down to brass tacks. We weren't there to present it to this committee, but I've had, I don't know how many conversations with apartment association and realtors and the housing authorities to make sure that, we're protecting tenants and we're protecting good landlords, and we're not, sometimes people give examples of really bad tenant behavior, and I'm like, we're not here to protect bad tenants, right? We're here to protect people who are trying to stay in their homes and are making difficult decisions between healthcare and paying their rent. So with that, I think we are ready for questions.
All right, questions from members of the committee, starting with Senator Wynn.
I think you kind of got into it that this is a dynamic process and you're still working through some of those. I think I had some just concerns with that section 9, subsection 4 section. I know there are no limitations on the length of that stay. And so it's my understanding, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit, that those presently eviction cases that are stayed kind of indefinitely until the county gets around to reviewing those rental assistant things. And I've heard that it's taking, quite honestly, like sometimes up to 6 months in order to do that. And I have some concerns about like those good landlords where you're in a situation like you had just mentioned, where by having those pending rental applications in there with like an indefinite timeline that someone could potentially avoid ever being evicted.
Jonathan Norman, for the record, thank you for the question. And so this is a delicate line to walk, right? Because this body and our federal government stepped in during the height of the COVID pandemic and rolled out massive rental assistance. And in the same breath, I want to say that this program was a wild success. We distributed just in Clark County $400 million into the pockets of landlords, and we kept 70,000 Clark County families housed. If you take that to the state, you add another, 20% on those numbers to see where we're at. So, by any measure, that is a success. In the same token, it is not acceptable for a landlord to have to wait. Now, I haven't heard 6 months, but I know there have been 4, 5 months, 6. It certainly is like in the realm of possibility. The last time I touched base with Clark County, they were, I think they were processing in December. So if we think about that, right, the end of December, January, February, March, April. And the counties did an amazing job, right? They're our partner. They stood up a program that got $400 million out the door. When, as everybody in this building knows, we're in it's difficult to hire people. So they got that money out the door, and I think that is successful. At the same time, I recognize landlords shouldn't have to wait that amount of time to be made whole, right? What I would offer is we are unlikely to see a CHAP level of rental assistance, I hope, I do hope, kind of, but really, like, that means we've had another pandemic or something's gone terribly wrong, right? And so, like, right now, the interim IFC in October designated another $15 million for Clark County. I think Washoe and the rurals did not ask for money because they still had rental assistance available to get them to this legislative session. There was an appropriation heard, is it Tuesday? Yesterday on additional rental assistance for Clark County, but we're talking about $22 million a year versus like $100 million a year. So as we wind down those CHAP applications, which they stopped taking traditional CHAP, on January 22nd, as they move through that queue, the hope is that we can reallocate those resources and be processing these much smaller numbers of applications. And that time will come down. I can't speak for the county, but that's like, as a community partner, that's what we're looking for.
So as far as like any potential amendments and clarifying language, would that include like definite timelines? Or, I understand during the pandemic, we were in a unique situation where we had, allocated a lot of money. I'll be honest with you, like, even like 3 or 4 months makes me feel very uncomfortable because while yes, there are a lot of corporate landlords out there, a growing number in fact, but there are still some people where having, that kind of problem might cause problems. So is there an anticipation that there will be like a set time, or is it still just going to be this indefinite with the hope that we're moving through this money and that it will just work itself out?
So I think we're open to a timeline. The discussions we've had with stakeholders are about tenants submitting applications. It says any time in the process, right? So putting a timeline on when that rental assistance application needs to be submitted by. So we're talking about that. We're talking about, it was brought to my attention that there are instances where people are submitting multiple applications that are really the same, right? They're rejected, and then they submit another application that is not substantially different, but it delays that process every time. And like I said, we're not looking to protect those people. So we're talking about that, and I think putting a definite timeline is something that we would be open to, along with those other two protections to have that move fast. And finally, I would point out that there is the ability for a landlord, if they're facing foreclosure, I think, to petition to file into that case. I don't know how often that has been used, or if that's a provision that was effective during the pandemic.
May I ask another question? Sorry, and then this isn't necessarily policy, although I think it potentially is, but when we're looking at Section 9, sorry, I'm cheating and looking at my notes here. At Section 9, subsection 3, A and C, I guess this is just kind of the lawyer in me coming out, but when you're looking at that section, a landlord files a motion described in subsection 2. The court may, it says, refer the designated eviction proceeding to mediation, hold a hearing on the motion, or maintain. I know that that's kind of different than typically it would happen, where if you file a legitimate motion, to either, in this case, to rebut the tenant's affirmative defenses or whatever it is, typically it's heard by the judge before it goes to mediation. And it kind of reads to me this way, that if someone files a properly filed motion, that there's a chance that that motion won't be heard and that it could be directed into a mediation. Is that my reading of it, or is that what was intended, or just for clarification on that process, I guess?
I think we want the judges to have the discretion. Like, at the end of the day, we never want to have people in mediation who don't want to be there, because that's just a recipe for no progress. So I think we want our judicial officers to have the flexibility to do either one of those. So if we can clarify that in language, I think I would want to.
It just seems like if you're filing a properly filed motion, that the judge should hear that motion and then decide whether or not those other aspects would go into play. But that's maybe just traditional notions of lawyering, I guess, in the courthouse. And that may be different when it comes to like some of these process and procedures. And obviously you're more familiar with that. So I don't know if that is the current, situation where motions are not being heard that are properly filed and people are being diverted into a mediation program immediately.
So I would say two things to answer that as best as I can. Thank you for the question. There was, during the pandemic, the mediation program that came along with the AB 486 defense, which the funding for that ran out in December. So there is no mediation as conceptualized there, right? We do have in Clark County, there was the pilot eviction diversion program, which launched in February, which can, based on questions that are in the answer for Las Vegas Justice Court only, so I shouldn't say Clark County. So it's a pilot program for Las Vegas Justice Court, which does handle 75% of the evictions in the state, where based on the answer, you can be diverted to eviction diversion court, where you're meeting with a social worker to talk about your total case, to assess you for the two pools of rental assistance that are still live they're live in Clark County, but they're also live within, obviously, Las Vegas, township. And so you're assessed for that, and then you're screened by a legal aid center advocate to see if there's another reason you're not paying your rent. Like, do you need to file a bankruptcy? Is that the path that you need to be on? And so then, and I'm getting to mediation, I promise. So then there's the ability in the court rules for if the parties are both willing to be referred to the neighborhood justice centers, which do mediation. But that just started on February 6th. It's voluntary. So I don't think it's functioning where a judge is ordering people into mediation when they don't want to go. And so if we can make that language clear, I'm certainly happy to.
And then one last question, if it's possible. I'm looking at subsection 5 in section 9 as well. Sorry, just focusing on that section. Obviously, it's my understanding that this is to address those bad players. Can you give examples of what this would look like and what you're seeing in the community that, where this would apply? This is on the damages awarded to the tenant for the refusal of the landlord to participate in the application process for rental assistance or accept rental assistance. Are you having people do you have bad players in the field? Like, can you give some examples
Yes.
of where this might be relevant and what those provisions might look like? An example, I guess.
Yeah, so we've had landlords who refuse to participate, and typically what's happened is that the landlord wants the tenant out. So actually pursuing damages, I think we have not seen, and that's just maybe because of the volume of landlord-tenant cases that are coming. So what typically happens is if the tenant, in some instances, is able to get the rental assistance, they're able to use that to get, if the person is not participating, they're able to use that rental assistance to, and this is how it's been during the pandemic, they're able to go and use that rental assistance to get a new apartment or new living arrangements.
So under this, every landlord would have to participate in a rental assistance application process under all circumstances. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Other questions from members of the committee? Senator Stone.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Senator Orenshaw. I know you're always trying to help people, and I appreciate your efforts through this, but I'd like to give some real-life examples of this. I've moved my real estate to Nevada in 2017, so I've been here about 5-6 years now. And my wife and I have worked hard throughout our lives to purchase properties, and we manage those properties ourselves. And I like to consider ourselves a compassionate landlord. During COVID, when you saw most of the devastation with regard to people, not being able to pay their rent and people seeking evictions, although they couldn't seek evictions because the former governor put a moratorium on that, it kind of put a unfunded mandate, if you will, on landlords. And our accounts receivable approached about $100,000, and we were working with CHAPS in every way we could to try to help our clients out. I'm very proud to say that even after that expired, we have never once evicted a tenant. We've always worked with our tenants. We've given them credits for the COVID period, which we knew were tough on them. They were always great tenants before, and of course, nobody expected to have a pandemic. I'm speaking more for the smaller landlords, like myself, not the corporate landlords that may have mortgages on some of these units, and sustaining $100,000 in accounts receivable when I didn't get any relief from Clark County in paying the property taxes when the governor said the people didn't have to pay their rent. So I got to keep paying those bills. I got to keep paying the insurance. I got to keep paying the HOA dues, which are encompassed in some of these. And meanwhile, revenue is not coming in. So I'm concerned that while you're trying to give the tenant the benefit of the doubt of having more steps before you get to an eviction process, you're putting significant delays on landlords. And the smaller landlords may have financial difficulties because of these delays and appeals that can happen. So I'm very concerned that the outline that you've given, I see the flow chart here, and they call it a summary eviction for a reason. And usually before you get to an eviction process, at least this is from my experience, we're working with our tenants. We're trying to put them on payment plans. We're trying to understand the plight that they're in, and we want to work with them. But sometimes you get 3 to 4 months behind, and they're not completing their end of the bargain, and you're really left with no choice but to begin the 7-day notice in the eviction process. I mean, I've got a gal right now who has been with me since I've owned the units, has fallen on some hard times. She hasn't paid any rent since November. and she's working through CHAPS, and we've been working with CHAPS, but CHAPS, God bless them, they don't have enough help. The money's there, but right now she's at almost $8,000 that we're carrying for this tenant, because we really like the tenant and we know that CHAPS is probably going to come through, but I don't know if they're going to come through next month. I don't know if they're going to come through by the first of the year. We're not putting this tenant on the street, but I'm worried that these delays could cause some financial harm on smaller landlords. So the corporate landlords, they go by their policies and procedures. They file all of the notices. They get to court, and it's unfortunately for them, a lot of the tenants are numbers. For me, the tenants are not numbers. To me, the tenants are human beings. So I would like to request that you maybe come up with a number of units that this bill, if it's going to be passed, would pertain to, that really targets maybe some of the larger corporate landlords and maybe not some of the compassionate landlords. I'd like to include myself in that have a history of working with these tenants that have fallen on hard times, and we're not rushing to put them and their children out on the street. We're trying to find them services. We even help fill out the CHAPS applications on the parts that we can help them fill out so that they can get some relief. But anyway, Jonathan, maybe you could talk about these delays and how it could impact a smaller landlord, and how we can fix that so that the smaller landlords aren't going to bear the brunt, and potentially some of them that may only own 3 or 4 units lose maybe their portfolio because they can't make their rent, or they can't make their mortgages or property taxes,
Yeah.
et cetera.
Senator Stone, thank you for the question. And you and I have talked, and I think if all landlords ascribe to the Senator Stone management style, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today. And I can say that, and so just to separate the two pieces, because there's two things where we're potentially talking about delays, right? We're talking about changing the process for the complaint, and then we're talking about the AB 486 defense. So I'll take the changing the process first. So in working with stakeholders, I think there is real opportunity to, while creating a system that flows with every other judicial proceeding that I know of, where a complaint is filed first, while still not making the days sting as bad as they might appear. And what we're looking at is the switch from potentially, and it's not in the bill, but this is the stakeholder conversation going on, outside of this room, is moving from judicial days to calendar days as we count those notice periods. So, depending on where your notice starts, right? If it starts on a Thursday and you have a court that's closed on a Friday, you could potentially have 6 additional days in there. So your 7 judicial days just hits differently than 7 calendar days. And so I think there's an opportunity to, save the landlord some time on the front end by moving to calendar days, while making the time that time on the answer, right? So that it's in a point in the proceeding where I think the tenant can have more meaningful engagement from social services and legal service providers. Now, I'm not going to pretend like that's going to be even, like exactly where we sit today, because if your notice files on a Monday, right, we can pencil it out, and you're looking at extra days, but it's not, I think, as bad as it might appear on, if you just give it a first glance, because judicial days and calendar days are different. So that's kind of the discussion going on around that. Is that a perfect? Probably not, right? But I think it's something there. And then on the 486 defense, and I keep calling it the 486 defense, but the rental assistance, what we're trying to avoid is somebody getting evicted on a Friday and having their rental assistance come next week. So, in the situations where we have these long, I think that's not acceptable. And as I mentioned to Senator Wynn, we're working, and I always take down notes. And I think having a time limit could be important, and that puts the onus on our local governments to process those applications. So, for example, in Washoe, they haven't experienced that same delay. Now, obviously, we're dealing with scale in Clark County,
Right.
And so social services in the county, I can do nothing but praise them for standing up that program and keeping people housed. But I think when you're dealing with that kind of scale, maybe having a timeline on there makes sense, and I'm certainly open to those discussions, but I also don't want to be in the situation where clients are coming into the Civil Law Self-Help Center and they're getting evicted and then they have their rental assistance and rehousing options. Then they're going to be an application fee, and all the other things that we've talked about. So those are the two things I can think of right now. You had another question in there, which was about carving out small landlords, and I think we can have that discussion, but generally, our position historically has been that people should know that they are protected by Nevada law, and we should make good policy for all Nevadans, and not split those groups off. So that's, been our position historically, and I
understand. I just think that we need to be fair not only to the tenant, but I think we need to be fair to the landlord so we don't put them in harm's way of losing their properties. And, I think it would be horrific if somebody was going through the process for rental assistance, let's say through Clark County, which I have to tell you, I think has been a disaster. And I don't think it's fair that landlords should have to wait 6 months, 8 months in order to get finally a check for those previous 6 months and maybe a few months ahead until that tenant gets back on their feet. And I don't think it's fair to the tenant that the landlord will evict them knowing that money is going to be coming as well. So we're kind of put in a pickle there. But as you know, there's really two reasons why you're going to potentially evict somebody. You're going to evict somebody because they're not paying their rent, or you may have to evict somebody because they become problematic. So I'll give you an example. In our development, we've had an incident where we had somebody that was indecently exposing themselves, right? We had another person that was shooting up heroin in the gym and causing a public safety issue. So those are some cases where you may want to expedite a eviction. And so does this legislation place a dichotomy on these two different reasons, one of which is a public safety reason, one of which is a financial reason?
Chair Scheibel, James Orenshaw, State Senate District 21, through you to Senator Stone.
Please
Just
go
if I could-
direct.
Oh, thank you. Senator Stone, appreciate the kind of landlord that you and your wife are, the compassion you show to your tenants. And certainly I've spoken to landlords since introducing this bill who've talked to me about trying to work with their tenants who are facing, whether it's medical issues, unemployment, trying to help them land back on their feet. And I've talked to many mom and pop landlords who tell me that the last thing they want to see is a good tenant not stay. They'd like to keep good tenants. So I'm hoping that with Jonathan, Ms. Elliott, all the other stakeholders we're working with, that this will be a balanced bill. I think Section 9 does have the procedure for a landlord to request an exemption. Currently, if there's a threat of losing the property to foreclosure, there's also the motion to abut the affirmative defense. As to the other question regarding whether a tenant, there's a nuisance from
Right.
illegal activity, that I think I have to defer to Mr. Norman just because I don't practice in that area, and I'm not sure I can adequately respond to that. But I do want the bill to be balanced and to come out with something that protects tenants but does not cause harm. And as a native Las Vegan, seeing my city change from the 1970s, the 1980s through to now, I've never seen our unhoused population as numerous as it is now. And I know that there are many different bills here in the legislature trying to address the issue, trying to help people not end up in that situation. And I think that this legislation, Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong's bill, some of the other bills are incumbent to move forward, because certainly I've never seen so many unhoused in Southern Nevada as a native Las Vegan. And I think that this has the potential to try to help that. So thank you. And as to the other issue that I asked Mr. Norman perhaps to address.
Thank you, Senator Orenshaw and Senator Stone. I think that in all summary eviction proceedings, we're contemplating a complaint with an answer. That doesn't, the notice periods, for a nuisance, I think we're navigating the switch from judicial days to calendar days. So, I don't know that's going to sit at 3 or what the right answer there is, but we're working through that. And I can appreciate the need to when a tenant is causing a harmful situation for the other tenants on the premises, that landlords are expected to take action. So I think that's still an ongoing part of the discussion.
Okay, but if it's fair to say, as the bill is written today, it doesn't differentiate the two reasons why one would want to serve a 7-day notice and ultimately evict a tenant, right?
I believe, yes, that's right.
Thank you.
I think we have a question from Senator Hansen.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm getting a strange sense of deja vu as this bill goes on. In 2011, when I was a freshman, we had the whole mortgage crisis, and we got involved. I was actually put on a subcommittee, met with the Chief Justice. We tried to come up with all these plans to help people stay in their homes who are upside down on their mortgages. At the same time, the economy collapsed. And now, 12 years later, looking back on it, it basically did nothing. Okay, in fact, it made things worse in the long run. My biggest concern, you got a 12-page bill here. You mentioned in the beginning one of the big problems is price of rents keep going up through the roof. You then mentioned that in the Las Vegas area, it's worse than it's ever been. At the same time, we have more government intervention in the market than ever, because ultimately it boils down to this. All the costs that we're talking about, that whether it's paid by the tenant or paid by a future renter, is passed on to the renters. Costs are going to constantly go up if we allow processes like this to go for several months before you can evict somebody, because even after the eviction occurs, assume worst case scenario, that means the landlord has to come up with the money that was missed for that window of time, and that is ultimately passed on in the rent to whoever rents in the future. And so what you're seeing is a declining number of small you want to call them, the small landlords versus the corporate ones. Well, one of the reasons you see less and less rental properties available is because they're losing money in so many cases when we drag these procedures out for an indefinite window of time. So I guess the question in all of that ramble is there any evidence by having processes like this continue on that you actually saw a decline in the price of renting? Because ultimately, we want to have people in their homes. We don't want to kick people out. As a landlord, I have one rental, my grandparents' house. And to have a good tenant, it's like a dream come true. Where is the idea that this, especially if it's been done in other areas, actually made the costs decline so that people who need to rent housing can get it at a much more affordable rate?
Senator Hansen, Jonathan Norman, thank you for the question. So to be clear, this bill does not lower rents or create more affordable housing, right? It creates a judicial process that tracks every other process that I'm aware of in Nevada and in the United States where a complaint is filed first. And I would say, to the idea that landlords would exit the market in today's rental market, we've seen over the last year over a 20% increase in rent, so, far outpacing inflation. So, does this bill deal with those macroeconomic issues? Does it deal with people moving in from California? Certainly not. That doesn't solve those problems. I don't know that landlords are going to exit the market as long as rents are rising at the rate they've been rising over the last couple of years, if we require switch this process. But it does allow for social services to intervene further upstream, which saves our local governments money when those people are facing that 24-hour lockout notice. And so, that's a roundabout way to say this doesn't build more affordable housing. Like, there's nothing in it. This is just making the process a complaint filed first. I believe it's going to move the days to where they can be more meaningful for social services engagement, for legal services engagement, and provide better outcomes so those people aren't in that rapid rehousing moment. But, it's a fair point. This bill's not building more affordable housing.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that, because that's obviously one of my, one of the problems throughout Nevada is we have people making $15, $20 an hour, and they're trying to pay $2,500 a month rent. and you know, the mathematics don't add up, and it's become a huge problem. So my goal in hearing bills like this is ultimately, let's try to get as much affordable housing and rental units available as possible, and the marketplace itself will help bring those costs down. My concern about what you just said is when you expand the time frames and make it more cumbersome to do an eviction process, ultimately that will make costs go up, and the people that can least afford it will be the ones that bear a disproportionate share of that burden. So with that, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know, I'm just concerned. 12 pages is a brand new rewrite of existing law, basically, and in the absence of seeing from another state that this actually has substantially improved the tenant landlord relationships and caused costs to become more reasonable, I'm very, very leery of it. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Other questions from members? Okay, I have a couple of questions. The first one is, what happens in the case where a landlord files the complaint but never serves it on the tenant?
Jonathan Norman for the record. Thank you, Chair. So one of the things we've gotten feedback from is not just that. So what happens when the complaint is not served? So the things we're working through are like those procedural steps. So not only that, but when does a notice become stale? So, you know, if you file the notice on let's call it just a 7-day notice, and are you still able to file an eviction at 40 days? Or so, you know, that to what happens when the landlord files the complaint but doesn't have a return of service? What happens in those situations? So we're working through those, and tentatively we're envisioning the notice becoming stale after, I would have to look up my amendment, but like it's either 15 or 30 days. So the landlord has to, proceed with that complaint. And then on the other side, that there is a return of service contemplating in 40.280 the constable filing with the court, and then they have a certain number of days from the notice of service to file their complaint, or the case will be dismissed and sealed. So those are things we're working through kind of with input from the judiciary as to how that, process should flow.
Okay, so then I just want to clarify, you worked on an amendment on the Assembly side that you haven't presented here on the Senate side?
We're working with the stakeholders on an amendment that I think would address the same process issues in both bills.
Okay, got it. So the specific situation I'm concerned about is, an individual who is moving with some frequency, having multiple open eviction cases where the landlord has filed an eviction notice, the tenant moves, and then nothing ever happens. And so after a year or two of this, there might be 3, 4, 5 eviction complaints in Odyssey or Courtview or whatever the case may be. And then is it on the tenant to go clean them all up, or is it on the court to go in and administratively close, dismiss, and seal all of them?
Jonathan Norman for the record. Thank you for the question. It would be the court who would seal them after a certain number of days. In Las Vegas, I think they're doing that by local rule right now. So we would be looking to put that in statute so it's clear across the board when those, like what is the timeline where that complaint can linger open before the court steps in and closes them.
Okay. And then my other question, I know we've focused on this a lot, but I still have a couple of questions about the pending rental applications allowing the stay of the eviction. And is there any kind of mechanism in place to ensure that, well, first of all, does the court verify that there actually is a pending application? And if so, how is that done?
Jonathan Norman for the record. Thank you for the question. So right now the court is contacting social services and getting updates, and it is a fairly cumbersome process. So that was in the CHAP program. Currently, when the tenant files the answer, they are checking boxes, and then the case is referred to eviction diversion court if they're eligible for those rental assistance programs. And so once they're in diversion, they're with social workers, and my understanding is that includes court personnel. I I think it might warrant some thought as to how that's going to function outside of Las Vegas Justice Court, like how that's going to be in North Las Vegas, because they wouldn't have the eviction diversion court. But even in those jurisdictions, there's communication between county social services and the court as to where the application is in the process.
Okay. And so it is possible, and I'm guessing that it is happening, that people are applying for assistance, having their eviction stayed, and then not getting that assistance, being denied. And so how are we going to handle those cases?
So that, Jonathan Norman for the record, so that is happening. That can happen under the system now. I would have to follow up to see how exactly they handle those and if they're screened out early in the process. I would be going too far into county processes to understand if the cases, so right now the cases are screened out at the application. Like if you get on the county website and you're filling in your information, if you don't meet the criteria, you're immediately denied. I think the lag is when.
Sorry, can you back up? If you don't meet the criteria for rental assistance or for diversion?
So diversion court is only for Las Vegas Justice Court. And so if you're talking, but rental assistance is a countywide program. And so it might be two ways to talk about it, but either way, you have to put your application in through the Clark County portal for rental assistance. And that's whether you're in Las Vegas Justice Court or Henderson or North Las Vegas. And that tool is screening you in or out whether you're going to qualify. So you can't proceed to the next screen if your answers, if you don't meet that criteria.
And is one of those criteria that you haven't already exhausted your rental assistance eligibility?
I would have to walk through the new program, because the two programs that exist, one, you're only eligible for a total of 2 months, and the other one is if you've faced a rental increase and you're on a fixed income, and you faced a rental increase in the last 12 months. So I would have to look to see if those two programs have that screening question.
Okay. I'm just concerned about, because I completely understand that the policy purpose here. We don't want people being evicted while their rental assistance is still pending. And I think that the program that we set up and the policy choices that we made during COVID made sense for CHAP assistance at the time. If we're going to continue that policy and allow people to stay their evictions while they have pending applications, I think we need to bring it up to date with what's going to be the norm going forward. And that's what I'm trying to kind of understand, is if we're doing this for more than, the 6, 12, 18 months of the COVID, kind of the height of COVID, going forward, how are we going to ensure that we don't set everybody up for failure by extending eviction processes for people who are ultimately going to be denied rental assistance at the end of the day? And part of my concern with that is expecting the courts to take on the burden of finding out whether people have applied for rental assistance and, quote, where they are in the process. And it's where they are in the process that really makes me nervous, because I don't think that it is appropriate for a judge who is overseeing an eviction to look at where the application is in the process and make some kind of determination about whether or not they're likely to be approved or not approved. So it seems like we need to have a more structured system for, and I want to be clear, I'm not saying that I don't think people should be able to stay their evictions while they have an application pending. I'm saying that I want to make sure we have a clear understanding of what it is that they have to show to the court in order to have that eviction stayed, because I think during the pandemic, there was a process in place where the courts were talking to social services. You described it as cumbersome. I don't think we want to continue a cumbersome process. So I don't know if it's having the tenants submit a copy of their application themselves to ensure that, it's submitted to the proper agency or something. But I think there's a piece missing here.
And Chair James Orenshaw, State Senate District 21. I think I understand where you're coming from as I, go over Section 9 and look at the affirmative defense that the tenant can claim regarding the pending application. Maybe there needs to be tightening up of the language there as to what would be adequate documentation for that tenant who's claiming that affirmative defense. So maybe that's another amendment that I need to look at as we move forward in the process.
And then the last question that I had was, I don't practice in eviction court. I've only done my own small claims. I know how to file, answers to motions or motions in criminal court through the court view system. There are drop-down menus for a motion to, revoke bail, for a motion to suppress evidence, all this stuff. Are the courts set up for these new types of filing?
Jonathan Norman for the record. So are they set up to take the complaints, to accept complaints? So I would say that's probably going to vary. It's going to be something new. Justice Hardesty has been talking about the need to switch the order of filing. So I don't think it's something that would be unfamiliar to our jurisdictions around the state. Las Vegas Justice Court is certainly, and, Clark County, to be frankly, is positioned to handle this pretty well, because right now you can file in Las Vegas Justice Court online, and we would anticipate them being able to accommodate a complaint. And then in both North Las Vegas and Henderson, I think you can generate your online document using Las Vegas Justice Court's website, and then can hand file it. But it does create an additional barrier for the courts, and also for landlords in those jurisdictions that may have to go to the court, multiple times to complete the different filings, whether that's the return of service, if that's not being done by the constable, or the filing the complaint.
Okay, I think that does answer my question, or my questions, and I appreciate all of you taking the time to do that. Are there any other questions based on those? All right. Thank you so much for the
Thank you, Chair.
presentation.
Thank you, committee.
We will move to testimony in support of SB 335 in person in Carson City and Las Vegas. Remember, you'll each be limited to 2 minutes, but you are allowed and encouraged to say ditto or I agree. Looks like we have folks in Las Vegas faster than here, so go ahead in Las Vegas.
Hello, my name is Angela Scalera, and I am a culinary kid and a former culinary member, testifying as a support as a SB 335. I am a proud culinary kid and a former culinary member. I am now a mother of 6, and I am also a mother of granddaughter, and one in the way. I have experience at getting semi-evicted. I had nowhere to go, having nowhere to go. I was living in a studio with my 6 kids and my granddaughter. I was paying $1,000 a month in a studio. That was the only place I could afford and find for my family, based on my deposits. I was not working for a whole while during the epidemic, so I was using my savings. One day I was working when my daughter calls me saying that the landlord have gave us 5 minutes to get out. I was running. That day was raining really hard. My kids were crying. My granddaughter was in the car seat, and she was in the car seat. I had to leave work immediately to get them. I went to the court to file an eviction when it was unsuccessful. It was not unsuccessful. My landlord kept all my belongings during this eviction process. Due to my poor credit, I couldn't find other place. So that led me to be on the streets. Nevada needs an eviction former now to protect the attendance. It's an urgent Nevada for them to support to pass the SB 335 and protect attendants like me, please.
Good morning, Chair Scheibel and members of the committee. My name is Melanie Arizmendi. That's MELANIE ARIZMENDI. And I am a political intern with the Culinary Workers Union Local 226. Culinary Union members have not recovered from the effects of the pandemic, and thousands are struggling with housing insecurity. The Culinary Union is a member of the Nevada Housing Justice Alliance, and we would like to thank the Senator for bringing this bill and for working with the NHJA. In a 2022 survey of Culinary Union members, 21% said that their rent had gone up $500. 21% said that they are charged monthly fees in addition to rent, and 15% said that they pay more than $100 in fees each month. Rent increases have outpaced wage growth. From the first quarter of 2019 through the second quarter of 2022, market rate rent in Las Vegas increased 33%, while average weekly earnings only grew 21%. In 2021, investors bought 18% of homes in Las Vegas Metro, and in some areas of the Metro, investors' purchases accounted for as much as 26%, over a quarter of homes sold. Nevada must change the filing order for summary evictions because tenants should have the right to due process when threatened with losing their home. Nevada's summary eviction process is bad and confusing public policy. Every Nevadan deserves an affordable and stable home, and an eviction should never be a surprise. The state must ensure the rental assistance programs actually keep Nevadans in their homes. A tenant shouldn't get evicted because the government is late on cutting a check or hasn't processed their application for assistance. The Culinary Union believes that every Nevadan deserves to be treated with dignity and that housing is a human right. Nevadans should not have to decide between having food on their table or a roof over their head. The Culinary Union urges the committee to support and pass SB 335. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tashika Lawson, Tashika, last name Lawson, Lawson. I would like to support this Bill 335, SB 335. After listening to all of the members on this committee, I do want to remind everybody that we are here to protect our constituents, and our constituents are represented more by tenants than landlords. I understand that we have a lot of landlords who are going to be up on this panel or who are going to be listening today. But when we're listening to people like the mother who just left, I do want us to keep in mind that there are certain things that we have to be able to protect. The American dream is disappearing for a lot of people, and that's because of the fact that the rents are going up, and these protections are only meant to get us to the national level. It's just to be able to put us on the same playing field that almost every other state is. We need these protections. I can honestly tell you the difference between 7 days. I've had a family who's called me where there was no emergency rehousing when all the government agencies and rapid rehousing clinics were closed. And they had to sleep on my couch because they had a disabled grandmother with 2 autistic children, 2-year-olds who had just recently been diagnosed. We should not be focusing on the things that are going to be causing us problems now. I can tell you as a person who interacts with the government all the time, the government is behind on a lot of the things that they're doing. We're just asking for you guys to consider the tenants that are really in need and are hurting, and they are our constituents and they are our neighbors. We have to be able to protect them, because if we're not going to be able to stand up here together, then honestly, I do not know why I'm sitting here and you are sitting up there. Thank you. I would support this bill.
Hello, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Andy Romero. For the record, ANDYROMERO. I am the housing organizer for Make the Road Nevada. I'm also the member of Nevada Housing Justice Alliance. I'm here to show support for Senate Bill 335. As you know, the summary eviction process can be incredibly stressful and burdensome for the tenants in Nevada. Many Nevadans are unaware of the summary eviction process, and even eviction notices are long, which include legal jargon that many of us are difficult to understand. We hope this bill will develop to ensure a better process for tenants. On behalf of tenants of Las Vegas, I'd like to express our gratitude for Orenshaw for processing this bill. We believe that this bill will be a significant difference in the lives of countless Nevadans who are struggling with housing insecurity. This is why I ask you to support SB 335, as well as thank you for your time.
All right, I don't see anybody else coming to the table in Las Vegas, so we'll come up here to Carson City for testimony in support of SB 335.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Silvia Buenrostro, S-I-L-V-I-A, last name B-U-E-N-R-O-S-T-R-O. I am a culinary union member for over 27 years, organizer as well, and I am a single mother of 5. My children have all been born and raised in Nevada, and as we have struggled through all these years in different situations, as we know, Nevada, it's one of, especially Las Vegas, you know, the industry is more about tourism. Our children are struggling and to be able to keep a roof over their head. And simply this bill, SB 335, will help a lot of us who are renters. I have lost my house, you know, as you all know, in the economic crash in 2009. And it's been very difficult to recover and be a homeowner again. And I wish that a lot of us who rent would have compassionate landlords, as you know, the Senator Stone and Hansen had expressed themselves. But unfortunately, we do not. And I have suffered the eviction process myself. You know, while my younger son was 7 years old, he was in the hospital with an asthma attack. For 7 days, I had to work on New Year's Eve and dealing with that asthma problem. It was a very difficult time for me and my children, you know, when we noticed, when we find this notice on the door, 7-day notice, and I had tried to apply for some economy assistance, which it took a long time. And this is already over 10 years that happened. And this process has been the same. The next thing I know, I got a 24-hour notice. And before I had the chance to even know what my process was, I went to the court when I tried to delegate and talk to the landlord, who the landlord was the single owner of this property, and he was out.
I'm sorry, you've reached 2 minutes.
Thank you. I appreciate your support for this bill, SB 335.
My name is John Solomon, John-Solomon. I'm in support of SB 335. I am a member of Faith in Action. There's a golden rule in all faiths: treat others as you wish to be treated. As a landlord, tenants in a manner differently in the legal system than I expect and believe I should be treated. I can post a notice on the tenant door, and if the tenant does not respond in the appropriate court with the appropriate defense in an incredibly short period of time, I can go to court without the tenant even being there and have an order for the sheriff to evict the tenant. If the tenant could treat me this way, the tenant could post a notice on my door saying I owed him $1,500 for damages done to him because of my neglect, and he will start collection in 7 days if not paid immediately, while not telling me that I have legal avenues to stop him from doing this. Clearly, our summary evictions are fundamentally flawed. As to the allowed defense of tenants of applying for rental assistance, this I consider to be good for me as a landlord. Evictions are always the most expensive transitions from one tenant to another. This offers a solution other than eviction. It is also a brutalizing process for the tenant to go through as it stands now, putting the tenant in an impossible to solve situation due to lack of time to find a new place and often resulting in homelessness. This allowed defense is definitely a win-win situation for both the landlord and the tenant. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel and committee. My name is Lisa Lynn Chapman, and it's spelled Lisa. Second name is Lynn. Last name is Chapman, CHAP as in Paul, MAN, and I am with Battleborn Progress. We strongly support SB 335, and we thank Senator Orenshaw for bringing it forward. Families who are summarily evicted do not have proper due process, and the current process is contrary to civil procedure. At the time when Nevada is facing a housing and homelessness crisis, working Nevadans are struggling to get by and are just recovering from the pandemic. We need to do everything possible that we can bring relief, and this bill does exactly that. We ask that you support SB 335. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We will go to testimony and support on the phone for SB 335.
If you would like to testify in support of SB 335, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christine Saunders. That's CHRISTINE SAUNDERS, and I'm a Policy Director with Progressive Leadership Alliance in Nevada, and a founding member of the Nevada Housing Justice Alliance, here in support of Senate Bill 335. Every Nevadan deserves an affordable and stable place to call home. Yet the current summary eviction process allows landlords to entirely sidestep the judicial system when trying to evict residents from their homes, and places the burden on tenants to initiate a court case should they hope to have the due process of a court hearing and judicial oversight afforded to tenants everywhere else in the country. Evictions and economic displacement impact us all by putting more economic burden on our communities through increased demands on social services, shelters, and hospitals by families who become homeless, and other costs associated with the disruption caused by housing instability. By contrast, stable homes promote educational opportunity for children and economic opportunity for families, allowing Nevadans to save for a house, pursue new employment options, and open a new business. During the past 2 years, our coalition, the Nevada Housing Justice Alliance, has conducted community outreach, put on educational trainings on tenant law, assisted in filing for CHAPS, and in responding to summary eviction notices. However, many times when a tenant was finally able to be connected with us for support, the time had run out on their summary eviction notice. This is inexcusable. The time is now to update our summary eviction process, and we urge your support of this bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Shelley Speck. For the record, that's SHELLY, last name SPECK, and I am a parent leader for the Children's Advocacy Alliance. And we want to ditto support of SB 335, and in the interest of time, I'm going to call it good. Have a good afternoon.
There are no further callers to testify in support.
All right, thank you. We will move to testimony in opposition to SB 335. Anybody wishing to testify in opposition is invited to the table here in Carson City and down south in Las Vegas now. Please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the record, John Sandy, that's JOHN SANDE, here today on behalf of the Nevada State Apartment Association. I want to start by thanking Senator Orenshaw and the proponents of the bill. As Mr. Norman had referenced, we have been in constant dialogue about this bill and others, and definitely appreciate their willingness to work with us and hear us out on some of our concerns. For the purpose of this bill in particular, I think the committee members really have a good handle on a lot of what our concerns are. As we see it, housing is an ecosystem. We obviously have issues in our state with housing affordability. And even the eviction process itself. While I might disagree with some of the ways that it's characterized, this current eviction process was codified originally in 1985. It's been added to, and if anybody spent any time in Chapter 40, it's a cumbersome statute to walk through to understand what needs to occur. And considering that about half of the evictions are done self-help by landlords, initiated by smaller landlords, it's difficult for them. But the added cost of others having to hire attorneys to work through the process, again, just adds cost to the entire system, which ultimately is going to be borne through rental increases, which all of us, I think, up here are trying to avoid that. And so we're definitely willing to work with the proponents to try and streamline the process, to implement the protections so long as they don't result in higher costs just for higher costs' sake. So I want to kind of finish off with saying, evictions are emotional for everybody. They're stressful for landlords and tenants alike. We're hopeful that we can all arrive at a good outcome and something that will move us forward. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel and members of the committee. My name is Tiffany Banks, and I'm General Counsel for the Nevada Realtors. We are testifying today in opposition of SB 335. We would like to first thank Senator Orenshaw for continuing to work with us on this bill and get us to a place where there is a fair and balanced approach for both landlords and tenants alike. It is our understanding that most states do have an informal eviction process. In the interest of time, I'm only going to touch on a few of the concerns we have and be as brief as possible. In Section 2, subsection 2B, it is not clear whether it is meant to notify a tenant that failure to act may result in summary eviction or to rather explain the summary eviction procedure. It is crucial that tenants have a clear understanding of what the notice actually means. The more confusing a notice gets, the harder it is for the tenant to understand what action they have to take, which ultimately defeats the purpose. Chapter 40 is already extremely confusing. Section 2, subsection 3 uses language already required by 40.280, stating that a landlord shall attempt to deliver personally in the presence of a witness or without a witness if a constable, sheriff, process server. If unsuccessful as drafted, this bill eliminates the ability to serve on a person of suitable age and discretion. Section 2, subsection 6, no method of service is identified. It appears Section 2, subsection 6B1 adds an additional 10 days to the eviction process to an already extremely lengthy process. Section 2, paragraph 7, it should be required that the tenant raise any legal defense they may have in the answer, as well as any stay of execution of an eviction order, so the answer also includes any defenses to be considered. As you can see, there are some difficult issues that need to be worked out from the legal, technical, and policy perspective, and I just covered a few of those today. We will continue to work with the bill sponsor and legal aid to address these issues. Thank you for your time today.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel and members of the committee. For the record, Dylan Keith, DYLAN-KEITH with the Vegas Chamber. We are in opposition to the bill as written and echo our partners at the Nevada Realtors, but we will continue to work with the sponsor. Evictions are not an easy process, and we are often drawn out in length. We do not believe this bill will alleviate the issues tenants face, as most times tenants and landlords are able to find a solution before engaging with courts, as generally neither party wants to go through this process. We believe this bill will remove that mediation period between the parties, and it will draw out the length of time for evictions and will in turn increase the cost on landlords and tenants. We will continue to work with the sponsor on this bill, and thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel and members of the committee. My name is Jeff Rogan, R-O-G-A-N, and I represent Clark County. We're here testifying in limited opposition to SB 335. First, I want to point out to the members of the committee that we've been working very closely with the bill proponents as well as our local justice courts to make improvements to the bill drafts in both AB 340 and SB 335, which, as mentioned by the proponents, are very similar in nature with regards to the process. The one issue that I wanted to address here, which is different than AB 340, is of course Section 9, which several of you have touched upon during your questioning here today. And before I even do that, I do want to offer an apology because it sounds like you have a lot of questions about Clark County's process and the rental eviction assistance that I'm not prepared to answer. And Judge Saragosa is in Las Vegas and might be able to answer those questions. But I do want to make available to you a subject matter expert from social services who could probably answer many of your questions more thoroughly than I would. If anyone's interested, please reach out to me. I think that might be helpful as you make a decision about whether to install some sort of timeline on a rental application process as part of this bill. But I do want to hit on a couple points with regard to Section 9. As many of you know, it has been a problem. It takes several months for a rental application to be processed in Clark County, and that has delayed many of these so-called summary evictions. One of the things that we've encountered are those folks, those tenants that are gaming the system a bit, the ones that are filing multiple successive rental assistance applications without a change in circumstance that would justify such a subsequent filing. And that creates problems not only for our courts that have to handle these eviction matters and continually put them on new calendars day after day, week after week, month after month, but also for our social service workers who are processing these applications and have to look at each successive application as a new application and consider it by itself. So from those two perspectives, Section 9 needs a lot of work, and I'm happy to work with the bill sponsor as well as legal aid to bring it into some alignment. But again, I'm available to answer any questions that you might have regarding our application process and to make available to you anyone from social services for that purpose. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Rogan. I'm going to ask, unless there are burning questions, that we take them offline because we have 2 more bills to hear today, and it looks like no one's jumping out of their seat to ask you a question. So you live to wait another day. Please go ahead with your testimony.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Kirk Johnson, Johnsson. I'm an attorney in Reno with Robertson Johnson, Miller, and Williamson. I have practiced in the commercial landlord-tenant area, including evictions, for 30 years. I represent both landlords and tenants, so I have quite a bit of experience when it comes to evictions in the commercial setting. I'm testifying today to urge you to amend SB 335 to eliminate its application to the commercial as opposed to the residential landlord-tenant situations. In other words, I'm requesting that you consider striking Section 8 from this bill. All the testimony today has been focused on residential tenancies, and that's obviously a huge concern. There has not been one iota of testimony of concern or explanations as to why we are pulling the commercial landlord tenants and their evictions into this process. There are several reasons why Section 8 should be stricken, one of which I just mentioned. There's really it's really a solution looking for a problem when it comes to commercial tenancies. Like I said, I've been doing this for nearly 30 years, and the process works fine on both sides. In the residential situation, I understand that most people aren't represented by lawyers and aren't very sophisticated sometimes, but in the commercial setting, most of these tenants are corporations and LLCs, and therefore are required to be represented by attorneys when they appear. So there are lawyers involved in the commercial setting. Most of the tenants that I deal with when I'm on the commercial side are pretty sophisticated and are pretty good at kind of abusing the process, unfortunately. With regard to subsection 6 of Section 8 is the new section which would require that the landlord file its landlord affidavit after the 5 days has already run, and then the tenant is given an additional 10 days thereafter to respond to that that landlord affidavit. That's basically tripling the time, because currently it's only 5 days, which is actually 7 because it's 5 judicial days. But by adding that extra 10 on it, we're now going to 15 days in commercial tenancies. And I can tell you the way the process currently works, you're at least from the date that rent is due on the 1st, the date you get an eviction, is 21 to 28 days roughly. Now we're going to be into the first part of the next month. So anyway, I'm sure my time is about up, so I'll say thank you for your time.
Thank you. And you can submit the rest of your comments in writing. We would appreciate that. We'll add them to the record.
Very good. Thank you.
All right, we will go to the phones for testimony in opposition to SB 335.
If you'd like to testify in opposition for SB 335, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, my name is Roger Wu. I'm a property manager here in Las Vegas. We hired an attorney to help us do a summary eviction back in February of 2022. The summary eviction and the CHAP application were started in February of 2022 and were not finished until just last week on March of 2023, more than a year later. During this time, the tenant had submitted 3 separate CHAP applications in response to our 3 separate summary eviction attempts, with each attempt being stayed due to AB 486. CHAP had given approval for all 3 applications of the tenant, but each time refused to issue any payment to us for an unknown reason. The judge actually put us in contact with the supervisor at CHAP during our most recent attempt to help us get the application processed, but that didn't help either. Each time, CHAP did not give us any notice of when the application was denied, and we had to wait months to go back to court and find out from the judge. In fact, CHAP actually lied to us and told us false information. They told us that the application was still being processed when we later found out from the court, from the judge, that at that point in time, the application had already been denied. The total amount of outstanding rent from when the tenant was evicted is currently at $78,000. I cannot support any kind of bills that will let something like this happen and doesn't give any responsibility to the CHAP organization to, tell us what's going on. That's it.
There are no remaining callers.
All right, thank you. That brings us to the conclusion of opposition testimony. We will go to testimony in the neutral position. Anybody wishing to give neutral testimony in person is invited to the tables in Las Vegas and Carson City. I don't see anybody in Carson City, so we will go straight to Las Vegas, please.
Senator Scheibel, this is Judge Sergo. So we're getting a little bit of feedback from the other room next to us, so I think we were hesitant on whether you could hear us or not and whether she can proceed.
Go ahead.
Senator Scheibel and committee members, my name is Barbara Paulson, Barbara Paulsen, and I'm a member of the Boulder City United Methodist Church, which is a member of Nevadans for the Common Good. We thank Senator Orenshaw for bringing this important bill forward. This is certainly a situation that it seriously needs to be addressed. We have had countless conversations with tenants who don't understand what the notice for eviction means, and they don't know how to access the court. Some have attempted doing so, but they find it very difficult. Some, for a variety of reasons, don't want to approach the court and self-evict rather than deal with the complex system. This not only leaves many people in a vulnerable position, but also prevents the courts, social services, and housing advocates from knowing the true volume of evictions in our community. We like Senate Bill 335 as we did AB 340 because it does make the landlord be the person who has to initiate the complaint. They are the one that's bringing it forward, so they should be the first ones to go to the court. We have serious concerns about subsection 6 in section 2. We would like it greatly expanded. This is a section that tells the tenant what they are to do in terms of responding to the court. It clearly tells them what they are being given, that they will have a filed stamped copy, they will know what court they are in, and they will know the deadline they have. In terms of guidance on how they should respond, the only guidance is it should be written. We already know that tenants are hesitant to approach the court. They have a difficult time understanding how to do so, and with no clear guidance on what they are to say, how they are to respond, it sets up a system that is not going to be successful for the tenant. Even if there was a short form that they have to answer, so they could answer specifically what the court wants to have, or if a helpline is available to help them. In order for this bill to do what it's intended to do, to engage more tenants in actively addressing the eviction and doing what they're supposed to do in terms of responding, we feel this has to be greatly expanded. Otherwise, the bill will not be successful, and therefore we speak neutral on this bill. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, Senator Chair Scheibel and members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. My name is Judge Melissa Saragosa. It's Melissa Saragosa. I have 15 years of experience working in evictions, the summary eviction through the Las Vegas Justice Court that handles about 75% of the state's summary evictions. I am testifying neutral because the court takes no position, as we never do, on policy issues, and leave that within your discretion. But there are certain areas that impact the administration of the court, and I want to bring those to your attention. I have already provided my comments through Mr. Rogan that you heard from previously about our concerns over some procedural issues. In fact, the one that you mentioned, Chair Scheibel, about the time to serve the complaint and what happens to the case if there's want of prosecution. I believe those are being worked out through an amendment to AB 340, and I will work with Jonathan Norman and Senator Orenshaw to convey those same concerns for Senate Bill 335. So I really want to focus my comments today on Section 9 and really highlight some of the administrative problems and the impact that this existing AB 486 has had on the court. It has been crippling. There's no other way to paint the picture. The administration and the process that's involved has crippled the court's assets. So one of the fundamental problems with the way it's written currently, and I want to reiterate, we have no position on the policy of staying cases pending rental assistance applications. It's just kind of how it flows through the court. The biggest problem is that the court has no cross flow of information from county social services, from those that are working on the rental assistance applications and the court. So the court is supposed to take certain action whether the application is denied or whether it's approved. And the problem is we don't know when it's approved or when it's denied. We don't know unless we go through a very rudimentary process of sending an email with a list of cases multiple times through the life of a case to determine, and then somebody on social services side has to look up every single case individually every time we send a list over and type us back the status of the case on that day. But obviously that changes. So it changes not only because if the application is pending, maybe it hasn't been ruled on and we've got to wait until it gets to a ruling. But the other reason it changes is because the current language allows a tenant to renew or make a new rental assistance application at any point in the proceeding. So if in the middle of the proceeding it's denied and we get information from social services that an application was denied, before we can even get to the hearing, they filed a new application and things change all over again. It is impossible to keep up with, literally impossible. So having some finality to the case is critical for the court to be able to just manage its caseload. One other area that I want to highlight, and Senator Scheibel, I apologize. I know we have a 2-minute limit, and I promise I won't be long, and I'm asking a little bit of indulgence to convey some of the court's concerns.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. One other area is, and I know someone asked this earlier, and how it applies to the cases that aren't non-payment of rent. So currently, as AB 486 from the last session was written and as Section 9 is written now, the only exempted type of eviction is that is for a nuisance. Nuisance is a very limited definition under NRS 40.140 or 2414. So it doesn't cover everything. What it doesn't cover are violations of the lease agreement. Those could be anything. It could be not paying HOA fees. It could be having a dog when you're not supposed to. It could be not watering the lawn when you're supposed to. It could be not cleaning the pool when you're supposed to. It could be anything that's a lease covenant or condition of the lease. And if the tenant's not following it, they're still protected under this current bill as long as they stop paying rent. What's also not included are waste. When a tenant is committing waste, if they're conducting an illegal business on the property, if they are having unauthorized occupants that aren't subletting or assignment of the lease that's not authorized, if they're violating certain provisions of the Uniform Controlled Substance Act, all of those kinds of evictions, as long as the tenant is behind on rent or stops paying rent, then their case is stayed as well. And so what happens is, at the end of that matter, if the landlord who works within the confines of this language and cooperates with social services, and let's say the rent is paid, well, that doesn't resolve the other problem. It doesn't resolve the underlying rental assistance, the underlying lease violation. And there's no provision in this language as it exists for the court to address it. It mandates that if the application is approved, then the court must dismiss the case. Well, now the landlord never has an avenue to come to court to address all those other violations. And in Clark County, if the landlord accepts the money, which they have to under this bill, they're mandated to, by the language of the contract they sign with the county, to not bring a new eviction for any basis for 60 days. So not only do they not get their lease violation addressed by the court, and the court is left powerless to do the court's role and adjudicate that issue. So there's got to be some mechanism in here where, if there's a multi-pronged basis for the eviction, that the court can still rule on that other part, even though the rent has been paid. One other aspect in here that's not covered is, what if the rental assistance doesn't cover the full amount of rent that's due? The court has no idea, based on the existing language or Section 9, what to do in that scenario. So we have tenants that are exhausting their 18 months, and yet they might owe 3 or 4 months of rent. If the landlord proceeds and they file a rental assistance application, that rental assistance application will never cover the full amount of the rent, even if it's approved. And there's no guidance to the court on what the legislature expects the court to do in that scenario. Are we to treat it as if it's been paid in full, have the landlord then have to file a new process, all of those fees for the process then get tacked on to what the tenant owes? So there are some issues that I would love to just continue to work through to highlight some of the problems. I think those are the majority of my main issues. There are just definitely some administrative issues that I would love to be able to work through to accomplish the same policy, but have some finality to the case and have some guidance for the court. And with that, I just open it up to any questions if there are any, and if you would authorize any, or I can do that offline.
Thank you, Judge Zaragoza. I think, like Mr. Rogan, you escape for one more day, and I'll ask my committee members to follow up offline. And if you need Judge Zaragoza's contact information, I'm happy to put you in touch. We will move to testimony in the neutral position on the phone, please, on SB 335.
Chair, we have no callers to testify in neutral.
All right. If you have brief closing comments, you may make them.
Chair, I want to thank you and the committee for hearing the bill. Appreciate all the stakeholders working with me. And with your indulgence, if Mr. Norman could just have one moment. Your Chair.
I'll be under a minute, Chair. Thank you. I appreciate all the discussion, and I think we've put a lot of work in behind the scenes that isn't necessarily here today, because it's a complicated amendment because it has so many stakeholders. But Judge Zaragoza, I think, referenced a couple pages of notes on the summary eviction portion, and I think my response is these all make sense, and we're working to incorporate them all in. And so I want to thank the chair and the committee for hearing this, and also thank Judge Saragosa, even though she's not on the committee, because her thoughts on summary eviction I think are really welcome in the discussion, and her experience makes the flow of justice just dialed in. So I appreciate her comments that are coming on the AB 486, and I'm probably going to incorporate all of them. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you both. I will now close the hearing on SB 335 and open the hearing on SB 368. Please go ahead whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you so much, Chair Scheibel and committee members. My name is Dallas Harris. I represent District 11 in the southwest part of Clark County. Really appreciate you taking the time to hear Senate Bill 368 today. This is a follow-up bill from 2019. For those of you who were here and on this committee at that time, you will recall that I sat here with Senator Ratty and Kent Irving, and we went through a long history of the discriminatory provisions that are often, were at a time, often placed into housing documents that would prevent certain folks from being able to buy homes or live in certain communities. At that time, what we ended up doing was creating a new form that a homeowner could fill out, kind of just putting on the record their displeasure with the discriminatory language, and then that form would then be recorded with all of the rest of the housing documents. What you have before you here in Senate Bill 368 is a mechanism to actually remove that discriminatory language from the housing documents moving forward. Now, let me be clear. History is important, and the existence of the language will not be scrubbed from history. Original documents with these language will continue to have it, but homeowners will now be able to petition a judge. The judge will then make a determination on whether the language that they'd like to have struck actually is void and unenforceable. And then the judge will issue a court order to the recorders to redact the void language. And then homeowners moving forward will be able to have documents without that language actually in it. I've been working with the recorders to make sure that we get this just right. And so you'll see I have a proposed conceptual amendment for the committee to consider. It makes it very clear, again, we're not going to redact the original written instrument. We're just looking to try and do it move forward. We're going to make sure that the county recorder records this new restrictive covenant modification form at no fee. And then also make clear that we're redacting the restriction from all future versions of the written document. The restrictive covenant modification form is not the same as the declaration form that we created in 2019. This is a form modeled off of something the state of California has made available, and what this does is allows recorders to index that old form, that old document to the new document that's been redacted, and the form kind of sits in the middle. Lastly, it kind of outlines what the restrictive covenant modification form will look like, and then we're going to make sure that the county recorder maintains the original instrument as a public record. One additional thing I want to make clear in this as well is that anyone who would like to get this removed will then have to provide the county recorder with a certified copy of the document that they are looking to redact language from. With that, Madam Chair, I will take any questions.
All right, questions from members of the committee. I don't see any other questions. I have one. You had mentioned that in a previous session we created these forms that people could fill out. And do you think that the number of people who created or filled out the forms would be a good indicator of how many people are going to be petitioning the courts now for revised documents?
Thank you for the question, Chair. This is Dallas Harris for the record. I sure hope not. There's only been 19 of these forms recorded. But if you look in this bill, I have given HOAs the ability to proactively file this petition and remove it from their CC&Rs, and then that way we can do the whole housing area which that HOA has jurisdiction over. I've also given the University of Reno the ability to file because they have a fantastic project that they're working on in identifying these different restrictive covenants all throughout northern Nevada. Not to single out northern Nevada, but truthfully most of them are in northern Nevada, and the only ones that have been recorded to date have been in Washoe County.
So do you have any concerns, or have concerns been alleviated about a rush of people coming to the courthouse the day that this passes and asking, judges to spend all of their time hearing these petitions and making decisions on racially restrictive covenants?
Thank you for the question, Chair Scheibel. Dallas Harris for the record. In a perfect world, there would be a rush. But I don't anticipate that's actually what we'll see. I mean, there's going to have to probably be a lot of public education about this new option before anyone really goes at it. But I personally will be pushing the lobbyists for the HOAs to get out there and proactively start doing this as soon as they're able to. I think the petition is set up in such a way that a judge really has a lot of options to kind of summarily grant these petitions if there's no opposition from the homeowner and it's very clear that the language is in fact void and unenforceable. And I did work with the administrative office of the courts to figure out what that petition process would look like, and they have not expressed concerns about a rush, and also are willing to make the petition for this free.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Senator Krasner.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senator Harris, for bringing this bill. I was a co-sponsor on that original bill in 2019. And I'm happy you're doing this. I hope it makes it easier to remove offensive language I find offensive. And I'm looking forward to the day that we bring another bill that just gets rid of this kind of language entirely, and we just keep it in the history books so we can remember it in the museums, but not in these public documents. So thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Senator Krasner. Dallas Harris for the record. In the history books is where it belongs.
All right. Seeing no further questions, we will move to testimony in support of SB 368. If you wish to testify in person, now is the time, and go ahead whenever you're ready.
Kent Irvin, speaking for myself as a homeowner in Reno. We bought our 1930s home in Reno in 2015. I read fine print. The CC&Rs started out sounding quaint. We can't make moonshine. We can't run a funeral parlor. But then I read that the property cannot be owned, occupied, or used by any persons other than those of the Caucasian or white race. Obviously offensive. Even though such restrictions have long been illegal and unenforceable, we still had to sign the covenant stamped read and accepted to close the sale. After that, I worked with Senator Ratty, Senator Harris in 2019 to pass SB 117, co-sponsored by then Assemblywoman Krasner. SB 117 seemed like a good solution, but it turned out to be insufficient. First, many of the racist covenants apply to whole subdivisions. We thought that one homeowner could file a declaration of, it's called a declaration of removal of discriminatory restriction, and that would apply to the whole subdivision, but that turned out not to be the case. I don't fully understand that. You have to ask the title and recorder people. Second, as Senator Harris noted, the declarations are still, although the declaration of removal is included in the documents you get when you buy your home. So is the original racist language. SB 368 will fix those problems. The conceptual amendment preserves the original historical document, which is important, but so is, but we'll redact the copies moving and packages moving forward. With the help of student interns from ACLU and from Senator Krasner, who recruited the first intern, and Recorder Kaylee Work, we started a project to identify racist covenants in Washoe counties. Before the pandemic unfortunately cut it short, interns examined over 200 historical subdivision covenants and identified 31 with racist provisions. Each subdivision typically has tens to several hundred homes, so that means thousands of tainted properties. These provisions are not subtle. The interns had no trouble identifying them once they found the big old dusty volume and the right page number. Please support SB 368.
Hi, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Alexandria Canito, C-A-N-N-I-T-O, with the law firm Lewis Roca on behalf of CAI. And we just want to thank Senator Harris for working with us on this legislation and urge your support of this bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Cadence Matievich, representing Washoe County, and I am here today with an official policy position from our Board of County Commissioners in support of this bill. We're very grateful to Senator Harris for her continued work on this issue and for her work with our recorder, Kaylee Work, to address the procedural concerns with the implementation of this bill. This is an important issue for our community, and we urge your support. And if I may now speak in my personal capacity, I too am someone that has this language on the deed for my home. And when I learned that the instrument that was created last session didn't really accomplish anything, I'll admit to you that I procrastinated doing something about it. If this bill passes, you have my commitment that I'll go door to door in my neighborhood and encourage that rush to the courthouse to get this done. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else coming to testify in person in Carson or Las Vegas, so we'll go to the phones for testimony in support of SB 368.
We have no callers on the line to testify in support, Chair.
All right, then we will go to testimony in opposition to SB 368. I don't see anybody coming to the tables in Carson City or Las Vegas. Has anybody joined us on the phone line, BPS?
No, Chair.
All right, then we will go to neutral. Anybody testifying in neutral is invited to the table here in Carson City or Las Vegas now. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Shawneen Guerin, for the record, S-H-A-W-N-Y-N-E, last name Guerin, G-A-R-R-E-N. I'm here today speaking on behalf of the Recorders Association of Nevada. I am the Douglas County Recorder, and we are testifying in neutral as to the intent behind the bill. We're happy to carry forward the orders as they come to our office and redact those documents as directed. And we just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Senator Harris for working with the recorders to make sure that we have the right information in place and the right mechanisms so that we can carry them forward in a consistent manner across our offices. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I don't see anybody else coming to the table, so BPS, is there anybody on the phone line to give neutral testimony on SB 368?
There are no callers on the line for neutral.
All right, then. Go ahead and make your very brief closing remarks, Senator Harris.
Thank you, Chair Scheibel. Dallas Harris for the record. I just want to do something that I don't do enough and give a shout out to Carly for all of the assistance on this bill. I really appreciate it. And she has been a rock star, as she always is, in taking feedback and turning it into legislation. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
Excellent use of that extra time. We don't give Carly enough credit for all of the work she does for all of us. So with that, we will close the hearing on SB 368 and open up the hearing on SB 401. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
right, catching my breath. We're running around. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and esteemed members of the Judiciary Committee. I am Senator Edgar Flores, and I am here to present Senate Bill 401. Specifically, I wanted to address a concern of mine. I believe there is a loophole in NRS 42.010. If I could just speak broadly first about a topic that all of you are very comfortable with now and very familiar with, which deals with exemplary and punitive damages. And as you know, exemplary and punitive damages really are focused on doing two things. We want to punish a certain bad actor, and or we want to deter certain conduct. That is the essence of exemplary and punitive damages. And when we talk about exemplary and punitive damages, they only trigger in certain instances. And most of that falls under 42.005. However, under NRS 42.010, there's some language in there that, in essence, lays out four elements, or four different things need to occur for exemplary and punitive damages to trigger. If an individual causes harm, so person A causes harm to person B, and person A was under the influence of alcohol or a controlled substance, and is operating a vehicle, and is knowingly operating that vehicle and causes harm, that individual, person A, could be subject to exemplary and punitive damages. I had an opportunity to review the NRS to try to understand why we have that language in there of knowingly jumping in a vehicle. Because I would understand that we as a society have taken a lot of additional precautions in saying we disagree with individuals driving under the influence of alcohol or a controlled substance. We have agreed to that. We've had numerous hearings in our legislative history, but I wanted to understand why we had the language in there, knowingly jumping in a vehicle. Because the loophole that exists today is that you may have an individual who has 0.08 alcohol or has some type of controlled substance, has taken a controlled substance, and now is impaired, and jumps in their vehicle and causes harm to somebody as a proximate cause to them being under the influence of alcohol or a controlled substance. And that person could potentially argue, when I started drinking or when I took that controlled substance, I didn't have the intent on jumping in a vehicle. I didn't realize I was going to drive. And I believe that was not the original intent. However, in reading the legislative history, I went back all the way back to 1981 and 1967. In 1981, it's Senate Bill 84. In 1967, I believe, was Senate Bill 157. And when I read the legislative history there, particularly in the 1981, which I believe was the 61st session, it was a very large, very comprehensive bill. And in that time, they were having conversations about what other states were doing. They were talking about a punishment for DUIs being forced labor. They're having conversations about forcefully taking property away from folk. And there was a very complex, very lengthy conversation about that. But there was very little conversation about Section 42.010. And I make that reference because it was difficult for me to understand where the knowingly got into a vehicle language came from, because I wanted to provide some history and then draw a contrast. But because I was unable to do that, I use that only to highlight that the last time that we've really engaged meaningfully in that particular section and that language was back in 1981. So I think now we are reopening this conversation and asking out loud how we feel and should we correct a loophole. And again, the issue is this. Under NRS 42.010, it states that an individual who is operating a vehicle under the influence of alcohol or a controlled substance, you also are required to prove that they knowingly wanted to operate the vehicle. And that's the section we want to remove. Because I think an individual who is drinking or under the influence of a controlled substance and operates a vehicle, that alone should trigger this conversation about exemplary and punitive damages. I don't have anecdotal data of how often this defense triggers, but I think it is problematic because you're going to have a scenario where an individual can say, yes, I drank, yes, I was under the influence of a controlled substance, yes, I jumped in a vehicle, and yes, I killed somebody or caused severe harm to somebody, but I didn't knowingly get in a vehicle, and therefore, please don't extend exemplary and punitive damages to me. And so that is specifically what the conversation we're having today, which is why you see the strikeout in my bill. And I wanted to hand over the presentation. There are a whole host of folk that are much more savvy and much more aware how this conversation flows in court that could provide more detailed examples of this particular bill. Please.
Thank you. Jamie Cogburn for the record from the Nevada Justice Association. From 2017 to 2021, there was 486 DUI deaths. And those folks, the family wants to be able to pursue something, hold the person not only criminally responsible, but ultimately civilly responsible also. And that's what, as Senator Flores indicated, there's a loophole, and frankly, it's kind of a bizarre loophole, that somebody that's convicted of a DUI, convicted of killing or severely injuring somebody would not be held accountable and subject to punitive damages. Just as a background, the way you get to punitive damages is you have to have some statute, as we have here, that says you can have punitive damages. The court has to approve punitive damages, and then a jury must award punitive damages. And that is set by the jury and only the jury at that point. And then the court has to affirm that at the end of the day. And so this bill, with the amendment, by striking through that language that the defendant didn't have to knowingly, before he started drinking, was going to drink and drive, striking that language will clarify that and get rid of this loophole. And with that, we would open it up to any questions anybody has.
All right, questions from members? Is that a question, Senator Wynn? Yes. Go ahead.
I just need you to explain something to me. Are punitive damages always awarded, or is it just something that this would allow it to be awarded? How does that work?
Thank you. Madam Chair, through Madam Chair to Senator Wynn.
Oh, please go direct.
Thank you. No, they are not always awarded. In fact, they're rarely awarded. I'm sorry, Jamie Cogburn for the record. Thank you. They're rarely awarded. They rarely come up. Punitive damages are purely to punish someone. So, the person has to be alive, so you can't punish someone if they were to die. You can't punish them. It is it's a higher standard that the jury must find. It's very rare that punitive damages come up.
Other questions? Senator Stone?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. So I'm just trying to understand the legalities of what you're trying to accomplish here. So we have murder, and we have premeditated murder, right? Murder is you find out your spouse is shacking up with somebody else, and you go and you kill the person. The other one is that I don't like this guy. I'm going to go and take care of him because he stole money from me, and I'm going to kill him. So you have a DUI with an injury that killed somebody in an automobile accident. So you're saying that you want to differentiate that crime from somebody who says, well, I'm going to go drink, I'm going to get drunk, and then if I'm going to drive. That would be a premeditated DUI with injury. What you're saying is that the DUI with injury should stand because the person was just drinking. He had no nexus to getting into a vehicle after he was drinking and then committed the crime. Am I hearing that right?
Thank you for that question, Senator Stone. Edgar Flores for the record. That's correct. And just the underlying premise, and if you're the injured party, if you put yourself in that scenario, imagine somebody saying, yes, I ran you over, and yes, I was drunk, but I didn't intend to get in the vehicle when I got drunk. And that be their defense, and that can hold muster. And so that's the concern. And while I believe that in most scenarios, the jury will get it right. Should it go to the exemplary punitive damage argument, conversation better said. We are fearful that the loophole is still there, and so we want to clean that up.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And I just want to clarify that this statute 42.010 is not the criminal statute around DUI, death, or substantial bodily harm. This is a civil statute that utilizes the same elements of that crime. It's kind of like a sister statute. It goes along with the criminal statute, but changing this statute does not change the state of the criminal law, correct?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Senator Edgar Flores, for the record. That's correct, and I believe those are covered under NRS 484C.
All right, thank you. Not seeing any other questions, we will go to testimony in support of SB 401. If you wish to give support testimony in person, now is the time to come to the table. Not seeing anybody, we'll go to the phone for testimony in support of SB 401.
Yes, we have no callers at this time.
All right then. Testimony in opposition to SB 401. Not seeing anybody coming to the table in person, so we'll go to the phone for testimony.
We have no callers at this time.
Okay then. We will go to testimony in the neutral position on SB 401. Don't see anybody coming to the table to testify in neutral. Has anybody joined us on the phone, BPS?
No, Chair.
All right, then that brings us to the conclusion of testimony. You don't have anything to add after all of that testimony? Okay. Then I will close the hearing on SB 401. Thank you for your presentation and answering all of our questions. Brings us to the last item on our agenda, which is public comment. Anybody wishing to give public comment in person is invited to the front now, but I don't see anybody moving. So we'll go to the phone for public comment.
We have no callers for public comment.
All right, then I'll end the meeting quick before they call in. Just kidding. Just kidding. We love our public commenters. They're an important part of this process. And with that, we will be adjourned until tomorrow at 1 p.m.